Good evening. I hope my voice is audible. Can anyone confirm if my voice is audible? Good evening. Is my voice audible? Good evening, guys. Good evening. Is my voice audible? Good evening. Is my voice audible? Can anyone confirm? Okay. So my voice is audible. So we can start the session. I think we are exactly at 6 p.m. So we can start today's session. Today's session is on GCP and its importance. So most important topic is good clinical practice and its importance. So we'll be seeing the following questions. The first question we'll be discussing about what is GCP, exactly how we are defining the good clinical practice. And the second question, why GCP came into existence? What was the history behind good clinical practice to come into picture? What was the new standards which were came into picture? So why we are using good clinical practice? That's the second question which I'll be discussing. The third question is I'll be discussing about what is ICH E6R2, the current version, what is R2 version, why R2 came into picture, what is the advantage of R2 over R1, and what is the latest version which is R3 which is coming into picture. And I'll be discussing about reasons for GCP, what are the primary reasons why GCP came into existence, and I'll be also discussing about core values of GCP, the pillars of GCP, why the GCP came into picture, and what are the core values of good clinical practice. And I'll also be discussing about the 13 principles of good clinical practice. So GCP, we have 13 principles to be used for conduct of clinical trials. I'll be discussing about the 13 principles. What are the 13 principles of GCP? And parallelly, I'll be taking one or two questions of interview based questions during your session. So without any delay, the first question is, what is GCP? So GCP is an international ethical scientific quality standards. So these are international ethical scientific quality standards. So these are quality standards which are being used for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting and monitoring of clinical trials. So now these are the international guidelines, ethical guidelines, scientific guidelines, and quality standards, which are being used for your designing of clinical trial, recording, reporting, conducting, monitoring, auditing, whatever activities you have, you are going to use this guidelines for conducting of clinical trials. Now, when you are conducting this in compliance with GCP, you have a public assurance that the right, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are protected and data is credible. So these are the definition of GCP. The definition of GCP is these are international ethical scientific quality standards which are being used for designing, conducting, recording, reporting, monitoring, and auditing and analyzing of clinical trial data, which involves human subjects. So this is the basic definition of your good clinical practice. So now international GCP came into picture because there were a lot of inconsistency between all countries. The regulations or guidelines, the inconsistencies were so much high. That's why we came up with an organization which is called as ICH. So ICH stands for International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirement for Registration of Pharmaceutical Products for Human Use. So ICH came into picture, which standardized the guidelines for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting of clinical trials. So now ICH stands for International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirement for Registration of Pharmaceutical Products for Human Use. Now, ICH has more importantly four chapters, which is Q, S, E, M. So now Q stands for quality, S stands for safety, E stands for efficacy, and M stands for multidisciplinary. So the efficacy guidelines, the sub guidelines from E1 to E21, there is a guidelines which is called as E6. The E6 guidelines are the one guidelines which are being called as good clinical practice. So now these guidelines are being used to safeguard the rights, integrity, safety, confidentiality of the subjects who participate into clinical trial. So if you participate into clinical trials, the rights, safety, integrity, and confidentiality of trial subjects are being protected. So that is why we are using a word which is called as GCP. So the GCP comes into picture It serves as to protect the rights, safety, well-being, and the confidentiality of trial subjects. So the ICH-GCP is being used across the all over the world. These are the same guidelines which has to be used for conduct of clinical trial or designing of clinical trial to preserving human rights and ethical values to participate into clinical trial. The first version of ICH-GCP came into picture in 1997. So now why GCP came into picture? Because there were a lot of disasters, there were a lot of clinical mishaps happened, including the Nazi wards where forceful participation of trials happened, including thalidomide tragedy where the pregnant women were being given thalidomide and it led to disaster of Focomelia, and including the syphilis tragedy where there was a lot of bias, including the investigator flip side, including the sulfanilamide tragedy. So there were so many mishaps happened, and there were one guidelines which has to rule all over the world. That's why we came up with a standardized guidelines. That guidelines came into picture, which is called as your ICH-GCP. So this ICH-GCP came into picture to make sure that the right, safety and well-being and confidentiality and ethical values, and to protect all the confidentiality or subject rights of the subjects in order to enroll into clinical trials. So the standardization is being done with respect to ICH. And why ICH is being used? ICH is being used, first point, for designing of clinical trials. Whenever you are designing clinical trials, you need to make sure that there is no bias and there is a proper objective which is being given, and there is a proper conclusion is being given, proper endpoints is being given, and to make sure that the rights of the subject, the confidentiality of subject data, integrity of subject is being maintained. So when you are designing the trial, when you are conducting of trial also, the trial is being conducted in accordance to local regulatory requirements or regulations or GCPs and declaration of Helsinki's are being done or not. That's the reason why we came into your version called as GCP, and including the data collections, integrity of data and quality of data, and the validation of systems which are being used for conduct of clinical trial is being maintained or not, and statistical analysis is being done, the documents are being developed from the designing to the lock of system. Everywhere in between, all the trials are being conducted as per your GCP. All the stakeholders included in your clinical trial, including your investigator, sponsored, CROs, vendors, or regulatory authorities, or contract research organization, or your trial staffs, are been following with GCP and understand the GCP and its importance to work together for the better patient health outcomes, and also making sure the rights of the subjects are being maintained accurately. So ICH-GCP is harmonized standards, guidelines which are standard guidelines to make sure the right, safety and welfare of the human subjects are protected, and minimize human exposure to the risks. The risk of the subjects participation is reduced, improves the quality and integrity of data. The quality of data, integrity of data, and the data which is being collected has to be utmost to the standards for the submission and getting an approval for the drugs. Speed up the marketing of the new drugs for the clinical trials. We can follow these guidelines. Decrease the cost. We can decrease the cost to the sponsor as well as to the site, to the CRO, and to the public. Compliance with this guidelines give the public assurance that the right, safety and well-being and confidentiality and data integrity is being maintained while conducting clinical trials. So now the reasons for GCP are ethical awareness, trial methods have been increased, improved, and the ethical standards have been increased, and trial aspects are being better understood. The objectives are being clearly mentioned, efficacy endpoints, safety endpoints are clearly mentioned, and the safety concerns are being maintained, the risk and benefit is being compared properly, fraudulent aspects are being reduced, the malpractice is reduced, the data integrity issues are being caught, and growing of research and development quickly for conducting of trials, and also the make sure that the drug is coming into market as soon as possible. So the core values of GCP, there are 8 sections of GCP. The first section is your definitions, which are glossaries. The second section is principles of GCP. Third section, IRB, IEC and its importance. Fourth section about investigator and its responsibility. Fifth section speaks about sponsor and its responsibility. Sixth section speaks about protocol and its amendment. Seventh section, investigator brochure and its content. Eighth section is essential documents. So these are the 8 sections which are included in your good clinical practices. The GCP core values are the ethics, the scientific quality standards, risk minimization, and data integrity and regulatory compliance. So the mainly you have this as your core values, that the ethical standards are being maintained, risk minimization is being done, the scientific research is being done, the data integrity is being done, and regulatory compliance is being done. So there are 13 principles in GCP. So the principles one by one we will discuss quickly. The 13 principles: the risk should be less than benefit to participate or to conduct clinical trials. That's a principle number 1. And principle number 2, the clinical trials which are being conducted, it has to be as per your GCP Declaration of Helsinki and regulations. Principle number 2, the rights, safety, and well-being of trial subjects have to be protected at all times. Principle number 3, the non-clinical and clinical data has to be make sure that they are supporting or they are adding the value to the proposed clinical trial, which is principle number 4. Principle number 5, the clinical trial should be conducted in accordance with the scientifically sound and detailedly written in protocol. Principle number 5. Principle number 6, the clinical trial protocol should be priorly reviewed and approved by your IRB and IEC, without which you can't conduct a clinical trial, which is principle number 6. Principle number 7, the medical care and medical decisions is a primary responsibility of an investigator who is a trained, qualified, and experienced person, physician, or sometimes dentist who conducts the clinical trial, which is principle number 7. Principle number 8, each individuals who participates into clinical trial has to be trained, qualified, and experienced for conducting your clinical trials, which is principle number 8. Principle number 9, freely given informed consent should be always taken into considerations, and every subject has to sign the informed consent form before participation into clinical trial, which is principle number 9. Principle number 10, all the clinical trial information should be recorded in such a way that its accurate reporting and verification and interpretation is being done. So all the trial data has to be recorded or collected in such a way that the trial data is being maintained accurately and verifiable and exactly is being done it. So which is principle number 10. Principle number 11, the confidentiality of subject has to be protected at all times. The confidentiality of subjects and sponsor proprietary information has to be protected at all times. And principle number 12, investigational medicinal product has to be manufactured as per GMP and should be used as per your protocol. Principle number 13, which is quality management system, should be implemented at all levels while you are conducting the clinical trials. So now I'll repeat once again. The first principle is the clinical trial should be conducted in accordance with GCP regulations and also the Declaration of Helsinki. Principle number 2, all the trial has to be conducted as per your risks and benefits. If it is risk is less than benefits, the trial has to be initiated and conducted. And principle number 3, the right, safety, and well-being of trial subjects has to be protected at all times, and it has to be given more importance while conducting trial. Non-clinical and clinical trial data has to be proposed clinical trial should support the proposed clinical trial. The clinical trial should be conducted as per written protocol, scientifically sound and detailed protocol. The protocol should be reviewed and approved by your IRB, IEC priorly, or else we cannot conduct the clinical trial. And the medical care and medical decisions has to be responsibility of investigator or a doctor, physician who is conducting the trial. Each individual who is participating in trial has to be trained, qualified, and experienced. Principle number 8. And principle number 9, freely given informed consent has to be signed by every subject before participation into clinical trial. All trial information has to be recorded in such a way that the trial data is recorded, interpreted, and verifiable with your documents. And principle number 11, the confidentiality of subject has to be made sure that the data is being confidentially collected for the subject related information and sponsor related information, and confidentiality of data has to be protected at all times. The investigational medicinal product should be manufactured as per GMP and should be used as per your approved protocol, and systems that assures the quality management system should be used appropriately. So in this also, in GCP also, there are some other sections which are being included, which will add value for your interview based purpose. Like for example, there is a monitoring process, there is a drug accountability process, there is an informed consent and its content process, and also the essential documents before, during, and after the clinical trial. So I'll park it here, and I will be open for questions. If anyone have any interview based questions, I'll be able to take for interview based questions for GCP and its importance. I have covered today what is GCP. These are international scientific ethical quality standards which are being used for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting, and auditing and monitoring of clinical trials. If we conduct in compliance with trials, the subject data is being the subject rights, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are being protected, and data is accurate. And why the GCP is being used, the history of GCP we have discussed, the core values of GCP we have discussed, and reasons for GCP we have discussed, the 13 principles of GCP we have discussed, and we have to discuss about ICH E6R2. In the meantime, if anyone have any interview based questions, you can put the questions in the chat box. I'll be able to answer. So ICH-GCP currently it is R2. The R1 version was outdated with R2 version. The R2 version is used for making sure that the complexity of trials have increased, the electronic systems have been used, and risk-based approach of trials have been started, and remote monitorings are being used, decentralized clinical trials are being used. For that purpose, we have initiated to conduct the clinical trials as per your electronic standards or risk-based monitoring or your decentralized trials or use of technologies and use of electronic system, and to make sure that the complex clinical trials are being conducted like oncology trials or RECIST criteria trials are being conducted accurately. So for this purpose, we have got ICH E6R2. Now ICH E6R3 version came into picture, and R3 version is now currently in draft version, which will be developed shortly. So now I have got one question already. So the question is, how does the GCP ensures the integrity of the trial data? So now already have discussed that the trial data has to be having highest quality standards and integrity, because of the trial data only we are going to get the approval of the trial. So now how are we going to answer this? How does the GCP make sure the data integrity is being utmost maintained? So GCP ensures the integrity of data as per rigorous standards while you are conducting the trial or designing the trial, and everywhere the documentation support is being done. So first point, adherence of trial protocol. So GCP ensures that you have to follow the clinical trial protocol while you are conducting a trial without any deviations. You have to adhere to your protocol, ensuring the trial is conducted in accordance to protocol to maintain the consistency about all trial sites. The second one, informed consent. Every subject who participate into trial have to sign the informed consent, personally signed and dated, else we will not allow the subject to participate, and we are maintaining the subject rights and safety and well-being of trial subjects. The third one, the data accuracy and reliability. Implementation of procedures like quality management systems everywhere for data collection, recording, and reporting, minimizing the errors like electronic data systems or EDC systems or RTSM systems or CTMS systems, making sure that the audit trail is being maintained, and making sure that there is no data loss in the system, and accuracy of data is being done, integrity of data is being done. Monitoring CRAs, the continuous act of overseeing and quality assurance and quality control is being maintained for making sure that the data integrity is being done. Adverse event reporting is being done within, if the serious adverse event is there, within 24 hours, the adverse event is being reported. And documentation and record keeping, which is essential documents like trial master file. So now how do we maintain integrity of data is a simple logic: adherence to protocol, data accuracies and monitoring and quality assurance, informed consent, adverse event reporting and documentation, and archival of documentation. So like this, we can assure that the data integrity is being maintained as per your GCP standards. So I think I have covered most of questions which we have spoken in during this session. And I have got one more question. What are the consequences if GCP is not followed? If GCP is not followed, there are multiple consequences we have to face. The first one in site perspective, if we don't follow the GCP, then site might get closed and get blacklisted, and 483s will be issued by the regulatory authorities. And there might be a media coverage, there might be a legal issues, there might be the regulatory concerns, and there might be a huge fines to be put on the site or a CRO or a sponsor or an individual. So every individual who participates or who performs any activity in clinical research has to be trained, qualified, and experienced, and you should have a very thorough knowledge of GCP, else you will not be considered into your GCP. There are multiple consequences if we don't follow, including the legal consequences, including the fines, including the media coverage will be given, and we will be debarred from the activities to be performed in clinical trials. So I think I have taken a couple of questions also for GCP, and we have discussed about what is GCP, why GCP, ICH-G6R2, reasons for GCP, core values of GCP, and 13 principles of GCP with 2 questions also. So thank you so much for joining today's live session. I hope the session was useful, and let's meet next week, one more session on Friday at 6 p.m. Thank you.